I've never been the kind of person to jump to wild conclusions when things in my relationship get rocky. I manage a local restaurant, hang out with friends on weekends, and try to keep life simple. So when my wife of 5 years told me she needed space to think, I took her at her word. I figured we all have moments where we need to step back, reevaluate, and maybe come back stronger. I had no idea how far sideways things were about to go. For the most part, our marriage felt normal. Nothing overly thrilling, but no major red flags either. Then one morning, while she was scrolling on her phone in the kitchen, and I was frying eggs, she dropped a bombshell. She felt confused about our marriage. That word clung to me like a shadow. Confused. I asked if I had done something wrong, or if work was stressing her out. But she just shrugged and said she needed time alone to figure out her feelings. It caught me off guard, but I wanted to be supportive. I suggested counseling. She shut that idea down immediately, insisting this was something she had to handle on her own. A few days later, she packed a small bag and said she'd be staying at her mother's place. I didn't push too hard. Maybe some time apart would help us both clear our heads. But then a week passed. My calls and texts went mostly unanswered. Whenever she did respond, it was the same vague line. I need more time. Please respect my space. That was the first real crack in the foundation. Feeling uneasy, I turned to my father for advice. He's old school, blunt, and doesn't sugarcoat things. His words hit hard. Son, space might be code for something else. At first, I thought he was just being cynical, but something didn't sit right. Eventually, I checked our phone bill. Not because I wanted to invade her privacy, but because I needed to understand what was happening. My gut told me something was off. That's when I saw it. Dozens of calls and texts to an unknown number. At all hours of the day. Repeatedly. My heart pounded as I did a quick reverse lookup. And when I saw the name attached to the number, my stomach dropped. It was her ex. She had only ever mentioned him in passing, dismissing him as just a fling, or that jerk I used to date. Yet here she was in constant contact with him. When I confronted her, she claimed he was going through personal issues, and she was just being a supportive friend. I asked why she hadn't told me sooner. She mumbled something about not wanting me to overreact, and needing time to figure out her feelings. My gut told me there was more to it. I gave her the benefit of the doubt briefly. We finally agreed to meet at a coffee shop near her mother's house. She showed up looking tense, and as soon as she sat down, she dropped another bomb. She wanted a separation. She wasn't sure if she wanted to be married anymore. I pressed for details, and that's when she admitted it. Her ex had invited her to stay with him for a while, so she could see if their relationship worked better than ours. I stared at her stunned. So you're test driving life with him to decide if you want me or him? She didn't answer directly, just murmured something about needing to figure out what she really wanted. I walked out of that cafe feeling numb and furious. I tried to tell myself this was some kind of identity crisis, that maybe she'd snap out of it. But as the days went by, she barely communicated with me while continuing to be in constant contact with him. My father's words echoed in my head. Space is code for something else, son. After 2 weeks of this, I was mentally and emotionally wrecked. I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind occupied. But every free moment was consumed by the reality of my marriage falling apart. Then my mother-in-law called. She told me her daughter had been unhappy for a long time, and that I should have noticed. It was the first time I had ever heard my wife was so miserable. I asked why she never suggested counseling, why she never brought this up before. My mother-in-law sighed and said my wife had already tried counseling on her own, but it hadn't helped. That was news to me. I had never heard a word about her going to therapy. It was clear that whatever story she had spun to her mother, I was the bad guy in it. At that point, my father convinced me to see a lawyer, not necessarily to file for divorce immediately, but to understand my rights. If she moved out to be with someone else, that could count as abandonment, which might have legal implications. The entire conversation felt surreal, sitting in an office, talking about legal separation, when just a few weeks ago, I thought I had a solid marriage. And then 2 days later I got the final blow. A simple text from her. I want to stay with him for a bit and see. That was it. No apology, no regret. Just a casual notification that she was choosing him over me. So, I gave her all the space she needed. Permanently. My blood was boiling. She was talking about it like she was taking a weekend trip. Like moving in with her ex was some casual decision that shouldn't concern me. As if that wasn't enough, he had the nerve to text me from his own phone, telling me to respect her wishes and not make things harder. Every part of me wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I took a deep breath and decided not to respond. He'd probably love the chance to paint me as some raging jealous husband. Then came the voicemail. His voice was so calm, so smug, as he told me that if I truly cared about my wife, I would let her do what she needed. Like he was the noble one in all of this. Like I was the obstacle standing in the way of her happiness. My frustration was through the roof, but I refused to give him the reaction he wanted. Instead, I started documenting everything, texts, voicemails, everything. My lawyer had advised me to keep a record just in case, so I did. And sure enough, a couple of days later, my wife made it official. She moved in with him. She sent me a text as casual as ever saying, "Don't worry, it's just temporary." As if that made it any less humiliating. She genuinely seemed to believe she could test the waters with her ex, and then come back to me if he didn't measure up. That was the moment I realized I was done. If she thought I would sit around and wait for her to make up her mind, she was about to get a very rude awakening. Her mother called again, urging me to be patient and not to do anything drastic. In her mind, her daughter was just confused and might come back. But let's be real. Moving in with your ex isn't confusion. It's betrayal. Then, out of nowhere, my wife texted me, saying she was disappointed in how I was handling things. Disappointed in me. She said I was overreacting by consulting a lawyer. Overreacting? She had moved in with her ex, and I was the one being unreasonable? When I told her I had already seen a lawyer, she flipped. Suddenly, I was the one throwing away our marriage, as if she hadn't already tossed it aside like it meant nothing. I hung up before the argument escalated. But of course, that only triggered an avalanche of messages from her friends and family. Some of them had the audacity to tell me to be a real man and support her self-discovery. Others insisted, this doesn't have to be final. It was insane how many people were backing her up, acting like it was perfectly normal to move in with an ex to figure out if you still love your husband. A few more days passed. I felt numb but also furious. That's when I made the decision. It was time to file for legal separation. A small part of me thought I'd leave the door open for a bit, just in case she came to her senses. But deep down, I knew if she kept up this nonsense, I'd go straight for divorce. The lawyer walked me through everything, explaining how her moving in with another man would be a huge factor in court. Then, he gave me a warning. Some people in her position try to flip the script, making false accusations to gain sympathy. That sent a chill down my spine. Just the thought of her twisting things, trying to make me look like the bad guy, was terrifying. So I made sure to document every text, every voicemail, everything. At work, I was barely holding it together. My employees noticed I was on edge, snapping over minor mistakes. One of my coworkers, my right-hand guy at the restaurant, finally pulled me aside and asked if I was okay. I told him a little about what was going on. He was floored. That's messed up, man. If she's test driving her ex, that's basically cheating. Hearing someone else say it out loud hit differently. It was the first time I felt completely validated. Like I wasn't crazy for thinking this whole situation was beyond screwed up. And then, her ex left another voicemail. This one wasn't so smug. It was more of a threat. He warned me not to do anything legal, or he'd start spreading rumors that I was abusive. That was it. I forwarded the message straight to my lawyer, who immediately sent him a formal letter warning him to back off, or face a harassment complaint. That shut him up, at least for the time being. In the midst of all this chaos, my wife showed up at my restaurant. She barged into my office, tears streaming down her face, demanding that I give her a chance to explain. She said she missed me, that she was torn, that she didn't want our marriage to end. I asked how that worked, exactly. How she could claim to miss me while still living with her ex. She stammered, saying it was only temporary, that she needed closure with him. Then she reached for my hand. For a split second, I felt that old sadness creep in. The part of me that had once loved her wanted to believe she was genuine. But then I remembered the lies. The secrecy. The way she had left me in the dark while she reconnected with him behind my back. I pulled my hand away. If you wanted to fix this, you'd leave him right now. You wouldn't still be living there while telling me you miss me. She looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. She started rambling about how she needed to see if she was missing out on something. That was it. That was the moment I snapped. Stop messing with people's lives. If you want him, go. But don't expect me to be here as your backup plan. She burst into tears, calling me cruel. Then she stormed out, my staff watching as she left. I just told them it was a family issue, and went back to work. That night, I made up my mind. She had pushed too far. She wanted space. Fine. I would give her all the space in the world. The next week, I filed for legal separation. The moment I signed those papers, something inside me shifted. I wasn't sure if I was ready for divorce yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to come back from her little experiment. She found out through her mother, who apparently heard it through the grapevine, and immediately started blowing up my phone. She accused me of acting out of spite. I told her straight up, "You made your choice when you moved in with your ex. I'm just protecting myself now." She cried, said she didn't want to lose me forever, that she just needed a few months to see if things with him were real or not. A few months. I almost laughed. The sheer entitlement in that statement was unbelievable. She thought she could hit pause on our marriage while she played house with her ex, and I was supposed to just wait? Her ex, meanwhile, tried calling me again. I didn't bother picking up. I ignored him. I was done wasting my energy on that man. But then he texted again, throwing out the usual nonsense, calling me controlling, insecure, desperate. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I screenshotted it, forwarded it to my lawyer, and blocked his number. I wasn't playing games with him anymore. Things escalated even further when my wife's parents showed up at my door. Her father was furious, demanding that I speak with them. He accused me of humiliating their daughter by making the separation so official. I just stared at him for a moment before calmly saying, "She humiliated herself the moment she moved in with her ex." That shut him up. Her mother looked like she wanted to say something, but they both turned and left in a huff. Good riddance. A few weeks later, my wife insisted on meeting one last time before the legal separation was finalized. I agreed more out of curiosity than anything. We met at a small diner near my father's place. She looked rough, red eyes, shaky hands, like she hadn't been sleeping well. The moment we sat down, she started guilt-tripping me, asking how I could do this to her without giving her a chance to come back. I kept my voice steady and said, "If you really wanted to come back, you would have left him the second you realized this was a mistake." She shook her head, claiming she was torn, that it wasn't so simple. Then she looked me in the eye and asked, "If I leave him now, will you take me back?" For a fleeting moment, I remembered everything good about our relationship. The laughter, the late-night talks, the quiet moments where it felt like we were all that mattered. But just as quickly as the memory came, it faded. Because none of that changed the fact that she had spent weeks living with another man, while I was left in the dark, begging for honesty. I exhaled, staring at the woman I once thought was my forever. If you had left him right away, if you had fought for us instead of treating me like a backup plan, maybe. But you didn't. And I deserve better than that. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. I had already mourned this marriage. I had already spent too many nights lying awake, wondering what I had done to deserve this betrayal. "The legal separation is already in motion," I continued. "If you want to talk about divorce terms, talk to my lawyer." She broke down crying, saying I was ruining her life. But I didn't stay to argue. I pulled out some cash, set it on the table for the coffee, and stood up. As I turned to leave, I gave her one final truth. "You wanted space. Now you've got all the space in the world, permanently." Everything moved quickly after that. The separation was granted. I think she was genuinely shocked, like she never thought I'd actually go through with it. Maybe in her mind, I was supposed to keep waiting, to be her safety net in case her little experiment didn't work out. Word got around that things with her ex didn't turn out the way she expected. Apparently, once she moved in, He started showing his true colors: possessive, demanding, suffocating. It didn't take long for him to kick her out, and she ended up crawling back to her mother's house. She tried calling me after that. Maybe she wanted to apologize, maybe she wanted another chance. I didn't care enough to find out. I blocked her. Whatever she needed to do to fix her life, that was her business now. I was done being part of it. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I threw myself into running my restaurant, reconnected with friends, and spent more time with my family. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were nights when the sting of betrayal still crept in, when I thought about how easily she had walked away from everything we built together. But mostly I felt relief. Because the truth was, I didn't waste another year waiting for someone who had already made her choice. She said she needed space to figure out our marriage. In reality, she just wanted to test drive life with her ex while keeping me as a backup plan. So I gave her all the space in the world. And that's how I ended up here, telling this story to whoever's reading. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: when someone starts auditioning other options, it's time to walk away. Don't let them string you along. Don't let them make you feel like you're not enough. Sometimes the best thing you can do is cut your losses, protect yourself, and refuse to be anyone's second choice. It hurts, yes, but there's something liberating about finally choosing yourself. She thought the grass was greener on the other side. She found out the hard way that it wasn't. And by the time she realized her mistake, I had already moved on. Now, she has all the space she wanted. Enough for a lifetime.